Okay, so thank you for being here. Some of our business on the agenda is recognize a newly formed board. So we want to welcome Brian Minier. I think I'm saying that correctly. I'll keep working on it. Brian Minier. And also welcome Martin back to his 2-year term. So first order of business, again, after we welcome, is to also solicit and entertain motions to election of the chair and the clerk. So I will entertain some recommendations and motions for that. First, the chair.
I would nominate that Elizabeth Fitzgerald be elected chair of the board.
So we have a recommendation, motion on the table.
I'll second.
We have a second. Any discussion? No discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed? None. Welcome back.
I was ready to move. All right, I will take a motion to nominate someone for the position of clerk.
I will nominate Bridget Burkhardt to be clerk. I will second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Bridget. And I think we talked about potentially, or actually we can move to that, designating a school board member to sign contracts on behalf of the board. Do I have a recommendation or nomination there?
I'll nominate Brian Minier to sign contracts on behalf of the board.
I'll second that.
Are you okay with that, Brian?
Just fine.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. I want to take a minute before we kind of kick off the business of the board, and I'd like to ask for a moment of silence. We lost an 8th grader last week, Claire Dang, sorry. A lovely young woman who's at Tuttle and also was at Rick Marcotte. And I just want to take a minute to honor her and also to, as a show of support for her family and friends. Please join me. Thank you. All right. Let's see. Do we want to do policy review now, David, or do you want to do comments from public first?
Your choice, Elizabeth. We can do that.
Why don't we shift agenda item 7, and then we'll do the review policy on board discussions first. So, any comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda? All right, seeing none. And actually, let's do amendments as well. Any amendments to the agenda?
Yeah, we were going to add an executive session to the end of the night. We started with one. We'll end with one, and that will be related to discussion regarding labor negotiations with administration, teachers, and support staff.
Okay. All right. Just put that on the end. Thank you. All right, so now item 6, which will be renumbered now, but review policy B1, board members' conflict of interest, policy B2, board member code of conduct, and guidelines on social media communications.
So this is always a good time for us to do these with immediately following the March town meeting and the election of a new board. So what you have before you is the board member conflict of interest. You also have the board member code of conduct, and also we included the social media component. So I'm happy to, we can go through it. I would like to get board signature. I think this is always a good time to just reaffirm our direction, purpose, and kind of the responsibilities. This sometimes can be a position that's hard sometimes when you're out and about, how you respond to questions, knowing that you are a board, and how to declare whether you're speaking on behalf of the board or as an individual. So this is kind of outlined in this. I don't know, Elizabeth, how you want to do this. We can certainly bring it back to the next meeting for signatures, but I don't really like to have something that you sign on the day in which you read it. So we'd be happy to bring it back, answer any questions that folks might have related to this. I know currently our current board members who've been with us probably understand it, but Brian, we want to give you the opportunity.
Several days ago, and I've had a chance to go over it a couple of times, so that's fine to do it today.
Awesome.
Any questions or comments on any of those individual policies?
Just the social media portion, is it still true that essentially the board is not putting out much by way of social media? Personally, I don't use social media accounts, but.
We have a Facebook page. We technically have a Twitter account too. We've used them very sparingly and only in situations like the year that we had to try the budget 3 times to get it passed, to really more as a way of directing the community to resources that the district already has. We don't have a person who has, you know, a designation to manage social media presence, and it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. So we've kind of been doing it off the side of our desks as board members, as needed, and it sort of goes dormant in between issues where we feel like we need to communicate more. And like I said, even when we are communicating through that page, really it tends to be a small blurb that then directs folks to resources like the district webpage or who the right person is to call at the district if you have questions, those kinds of things. And I don't know that there's much more intent to sort of go beyond that, because social media tends to, you know, just for school board, just like anywhere else, it tends to devolve very quickly into these, you know, back and forth discussions and the comments and things, and it takes a lot to monitor that and and keep up with it, and it's just not sort of a role that we envision for ourselves as board members.
I think just also, when we've really used it actively, it has been for a particular issue, and we've had the board designate a subcommittee to give them, you know, the responsibility and authority to speak on behalf of the board. You know, if we were doing it ongoing, we'd have to circle back to the board essentially for whatever post we were putting out there.
Right.
Because we wouldn't want to have a broad authority for a subcommittee to do that. But when it was the budget, you know, we were able to do that.
Yeah, and occasionally when I'm on top of it, I will go on there and, you know, just note that the school board meeting is coming up and put, you know, an event on there so that folks who are following it, there are about 240 some followers, and they tend to then spread that to other, you know, social media sites that focus on South Burlington on our behalf.
Yep, okay.
And I think if I look through these policies, if I think about some of the items that come up with some, I don't want to say routine nature, but maybe through different transitions of boards, I'd say a couple things are, one, that, and David will appreciate this, but individual board members do not direct the school staff in any way. Jelani, you may disagree with that, but yeah, that is really not the role of the board to have any influence, and obviously everything goes through the superintendent in terms of requests for board work. I think the other one that typically comes up is we do our work as a body in typically publicly warned meetings. Sometimes when you get caught at the grocery store or something, you'd like to share sort of what the board opinion is, but unless we are functioning as the board, there sort of really isn't a board opinion. There typically might be somebody designated as a spokesperson if there's some topics that are of community interest. I think that comes up now and then. I'm trying to think of other ones. I don't know. Anybody else think of typical issues that come up?
I think you hit on the, you know, just reuse the grocery store analogy, but it's, you know, you can get in that location, you want to, someone will come up with a concern, and your desire probably is to either or, again, the absence of a no or a direct sometimes will breed an acceptance. So I think being really clear and kind of candid in your response, it sounds like you have a concern. I would ask that you connect with the administration, and I think a good thing to do is to then say, I do want to hear back from you, or I will check with you on your on whether or not you did that, because I think the worry sometimes is that just feels like you just pushed it, but you didn't care. So push it and say, I'd like to check to make sure you actually did reach out to the administration or what have you. But I think those are, sometimes you get trapped in, and I'm speaking to my own experience, is that, but the or the no sometimes says, well, no, I talked to them and he or she was in agreement. Well, no, they weren't. They didn't say anything, but they didn't necessarily direct either. So I think it's a good kind of a additional segue to that particular conversation.
The other thing that to be careful of is, back to social media, is open meeting law. And we really can't have multiple board members monitoring or, working on a site for open meeting law reasons. So, we can kind of make decisions as a board and push that out through the Facebook page on behalf of the board. But we can't, for example, go on Community Watch and have a discussion on Community Watch without violating open meeting law. So that can be very challenging, because I do find myself sometimes tagged in those conversations and they want a response. The challenge also becomes that if you do start responding to, a particular one, there's been a proliferation of them, and then, the others sort of feel like, well, if you're going to monitor that one and respond to their questions, then you should be monitoring ours too. And so we just try to make clear to the community that the way to reach us is through email. The board members' emails are all out there by coming to meetings, and our phone numbers are there as well. And then if it's more of an administrative issue, to reach out to David.
Yeah, I think it's again, this is always a good conversation for a whole board. Certainly Brian, I met with him briefly once, just kind of before he was elected, and we have a meeting set up too. We'll go over more of this, but I think the whole email piece, as you brought up, Bridget, is sometimes tricky, but again, we have protocols in place where if you do have questions, you direct them to Elizabeth. Elizabeth will, either push to me, or then we'll share appropriately with a board member as needed, and not get into any violations. Yeah, it's all important, right? It's important that we don't have offline conversations, and where we can have open public meeting conversations, we should. And where we need to have executive session, they have to be qualifying executive session related items. They can't just be for things that don't qualify. Awesome.
All right. Do we have these for signature
tonight?
Then?
I think they're in. We don't.
We don't.
Oh,
okay. So we will bring them back.
We'll bring them back, but we'll note that. That's helpful. Thank you.
All right. We'll move on to announcements and student representative report. Arnell.
So Cole is not here today. He is at his final dress rehearsal for the play tomorrow, which is named The Whole Shebang, which is a comedy tomorrow and Friday night at 7 p.m. So hopefully we can all support Cole there maybe. Also looking forward to next week. Talent Night is also next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at 7 p.m., which is a fun tradition in between winter and spring season.
Did you have a part this year again?
Yes, a much smaller part though. Not as big as last year. But that'll be exciting. We love doing that. And then also yesterday was obviously voting day. The budget passed, which is awesome. And welcome to our new member. Brooke, Cole, and I are very excited to work with you, and for Martin for being back. And today classes resumed after a long 10 days that were much needed. And then I also don't typically talk about sporting events that much, but it is playoff season for winter sports, and both the bowling and dance teams got state championship wins over the vacation, which is awesome. The bowling team also won the sportsmanship award, which I think is great, speaking to the character of our school. And then also the boys basketball team had a huge upset victory over CVU last night, and they have passed the first round. So a lot of exciting stuff there as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And my understanding is you were able to vote in this election.
Yes, I was the first time. Congratulations. Yes, that was awesome, actually.
That's great. All right. Any other announcements? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 10, city-school collaboration.
So just an update, city-school collaboration. We've had a series of meetings just more administratively and not with Elizabeth. This is specific to our current MOU between the city and the school related to the land exchange. And so we've had a meeting just recently, and we're working out the specifics of the MOU, particularly in some of the stormwater related matter which is needed. and requested by the city. So we'll be, I think it's important for the public to know we're going to be continuing that work, and we'll be back on we'll have it on a upcoming agenda for a more in-depth conversation about stormwater and land conveyance. And so we really want to make sure the public are aware and stay tuned to the agendas upcoming. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to some of the agenda items. But that's all that we have going on in that particular regard. Obviously, city-school collaboration, obviously, as Arnell said, our budgets, the school budget passed, the city budget passed, the car rental passed, the 1% did not pass, and obviously councilors and board members were either re-elected or in this case, Brian was new. So those are some pretty. And yes, and I'm sorry, and the tobacco 1%, which we're going to talk about that when we come up on the election results. But thank you, Bridget, for not letting me forget that. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep. Awesome.
So I know that District 74 once again did not approve our budget in just that district, which the Chamberlain, I don't know that they have in the last several times.
Yeah.
But the other 3 districts certainly did. But 55%, I think that's, what was last year? Recall?
I do not,
Yeah.
I did not,
I think it was
I did
like in the
record it on the
60s.
tabs for you folks. I don't have it,
It was
the
a
other
little
ones.
closer than the last year at least.
Yeah. But we're going to talk about that a little bit and get board reflections on item 13, and kind of some ideas maybe that what we can do around that. Yeah.
All right. We'll move on to the superintendent's report.
So I have one item on here, update on the soundproofing at the Chamberlain School. Just again to update the board, we have been in conversation with the Burlington Airport management officials and the FAA, and really looking at how we can ensure that the Chamberlain School is appropriate and best fit for instruction. So we've been talking and sharing concerns and ideas around how to do that. Currently, there was a grant submission that helped to put forth money to soundproof or sound mitigate the school. What we know now is that there's been some slight changes in that, where although we still qualify for the grant, but the new noise exposure maps, which go for 5 years, the current one was 2015 through 2020. They are updating that noise exposure map 1 year earlier than the sunsetting of that one, and that has not yet been done. And so the word is if it's less favorable, or I would say more healthy on the environment as far as noise, then we would likely not qualify for the grant. Or obviously, if it was louder, it could push new options in there. Basically, I'm saying I need some answers, and we need to make sure that we're set up for the arrival of the first F-35 in September of 2019, so that we're in a good position. So this week, actually yesterday, I've submitted a request for information, a public records request to the airport. I'm not particularly sure why they have not been able to provide us with some of the information to date, but I'm asking for the results of the FAA testing, which they alluded to that they could get us. And again, it was an email that went first, but also a public records request to help get the information that we need to make an informed decision. Some of the perhaps slowdown, although I don't know this, but certainly some of the governmental shutdown that occurred perhaps delayed that, but that's not, I don't know that. That's just some of the concern. So I'll have more of an update for the board. I'll keep this one on there too. I think this is also important, as is the conversation around the Rick Marcotte property as well. I don't know if boards have questions.
What's the fallback, David, if we don't hear?
So if we don't hear, then I'm going to have to, again, if we don't hear, then we'll live, I mean, we could live in the current circumstances that we have now with the current noise exposure that we have now, which is the F-16s. It's not 100% clear to us that it's going to be louder. In some ways, what we've heard is it's going to be, the exposure is going to be less. So I got to be careful of louder or an exposure. The exposure over time is likely to be less, is what we've been shared, but we want the data. Part of the reason for the data, we want to see the FAA data because we did our own testing, right? The district paid for this own testing, and we want to look at that comparability of that data. It's all talked about in the contour lines around the school. So if those contour line decibels increase, then that will be a concern, and or it could determine additional measures that could be taken to mitigate it. And obviously, if it's more favorable to student outcome and the sound's better, then what they're saying is it could exclude us. The other thing that's a conversation that I think is important is that when you do typically on residential property, when you do a upgrade, a sound mitigation measure, and you sign off on those and you receive federal monies to do that, then you abdicate. Yes, right. Thank you. Your opportunity for future things. And so I'm saying, no, that would not happen on a school property. And so there's pretty, I mean, I think again pretty clear about why we would not do that. So there's some pieces in here, but again, as I've told you, the board, this is part of my work to you, is that my contingency plan was to ensure that this property was going to be appropriate. And in this budget, I did not outfit any money for any sort of movement of students or trailers or anything of that nature. So my direction is to sound mitigate, and that sound mitigation could be with additional insulation in the roof, larger windows, air conditioning, things of that nature are currently where we're at. Again, the airport management has been fine for me to deal with, although I'm asking for information that I need to make informed decisions. And, September for me is, approaching quickly. So I think it's important that the board, know a little bit where we're at. I don't know if other questions.
So they haven't given a new date? So my understanding was that the date for the noise exposure maps was originally early December, and then it got moved again, and then it got moved again. Have they given any kind of estimate, or now they've just sort of said, you'll get it when you get it, and that's why you're having to then ask for the information? Yeah,
and so again, part of this is, I can understand, the governmental shutdown, so things slow down, but I feel that this is a critical issue, and I want to be able to make informed decisions and inform the school board and involve other officials if need be to help get an answer sooner rather than later, so.
Sort of to catch up, I had, I think, a pair of questions. One is you were drawing a distinction between how loud it is and their exposure over time. Like, do we know what the flight schedule is going to be like and how long or how often it'll affect?
Pretty much the same.
Yeah.
The same. What we know from the Air Force, the Vermont Air Guard. Again, this is about the whole noise exposure of the whole airport, but the particular incidences are related, or the louder incidents are related to the fighter jets. F-16s currently, F-35s coming. So the flight schedules, what we understand, will be pretty much exactly the same.
Which is different than what the environmental impact statement was suggesting, which was fewer takeoffs and landings.
Yeah, so I would have to go back and
new information.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and visit. That would, what I understood to be that it wasn't going to be more. It was going to be at least not, the same or maybe slightly less. And remember, we lose the F-16s are going to go away in April. They'll be gone. So there'll be no flying in April, May, June, July, and August. And then the first F-35 comes in September. One or two, I think, come in. One first and then another one shortly thereafter. And then the build out kind of happens on a month-by-month basis.
And then the second question was, I know the quantitative question of decibels is interesting in part because we can qualify for this grant, but is there a qualitative understanding of, can people not have a proper conversation for a minute, or are kids terrified? What's...
So it's really more of what we hear from our teachers and staff is it's really a pause. It's you can't really continue your conversations without significantly increasing your volume.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't, as we all know, when you're in a parking lot and something loud, you get a little closer together, and then at some point it's not appropriate, so you kind of just do this. That's what happens a lot in the classroom, is when that happens, they just kind of do this, about 10 seconds or so, and then they continue their conversation. And again, I think that's critically important, and we've taken those number of interruptions and passed over the course of the year, and the board, I've provided that. Though, some people may say that's not a lot, but anytime that, I always say that's that 15-second or 10-second of opportunity when a student might be right in the middle of almost an exchange, or the teacher on an appropriate response that's there, and to wait 10 seconds sometimes may not be the same opportunity. So it's critically important for us to pay attention to that. Certainly most important, we don't want it to be a health-related hazard to anybody for hearing the noise. And then second is really about, instructional interruption.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we've, in the past, wanted to look at both the outcomes, whether there's any measurable effect to outcomes or to health. And we've not, from what I understand, found evidence that there is. Our Chamberlain students, as far as outcomes on objective tests and such, are doing equivalent to what's going on in Orchard as well as at Central. So, and there hasn't been any notable health effects from what I understand. There may be some issues out on the playground with kids who are more sensitive to noise if the jets come by. That's certainly a concern. I mean, there are concerns, but not anything that has required us to move from Chamberlain at this point. But we really want to understand that baseline before the F-35s get here.
Yeah.
Noah had a question.
Noah?
I just didn't know if they were doing the new sound map while the F-16s are here, and then if that's going to last for 5 years before they look at what's going to happen to the F-35s.
So
The timing seems a little...
No, it's a computer model. So it's a computer model based on the F-35 is what they're working on.
Okay.
Based on the number of times I know the board has heard that we are not getting third-party information that would inform our decision-making, I'm kind of wondering at what point is there a backup plan that we would even invest in a minimum of soundproofing? I mean, our construction season is the summer, maybe, in some cases, and just a minimum of soundproofing that I guess I'd call it err on the side of caution, anticipating, while we're waiting for data and understanding we do have this pause issue we've known about for many, many years. Mm-hmm. Is that something administration is considering, that sort of at what point that, there might be looking at getting reimbursed later for some maybe more modest investments that at least raise the bar around soundproofing?
It's a good question. I believe the sound mitigation measure, based on our personal testing, our testing that we did, and what we understand is that from the FAA, at least on the kind of verbal confirmation of the testing that the FAA did, or the FAA contracted to do, what I believe under the grant submission, although I don't have it yet, but what I believe from Gene and Nick, the grant recommendation for sound mitigation would be for air conditioning. Why? Because when the windows are shut, it was within the appropriate level. It was when the windows are open, beginning of the year, again, I'm going to just say, August, September, October, or any hot periods of time, and then on the other side of the spring side is when those would be concerned areas. So, and again, this is for, instruction and learning to be happening. We're not to say that we're not worried about the environment outside playgrounds, but again, these are two incidences that occur on a daily basis, maybe less, but nonetheless, that is what we know to be the sound mitigation recommendation, perhaps. So we could get moving on that, and I'm happy to look into what that would look like, with the hopes that it would be a reimbursement.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the board is going to necessarily weigh in. I think it's really,
I'm hearing you.
yeah,
Good question.
up to administration to kind of come up with that recommendation. I just, the more I hear about the delays and the information, the more I worry about the window we might have to make those improvements. Any other comments or questions?
Thanks.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 12, master planning and visioning.
So I have to, we had a meeting today, and as a result of the sad passing of our 8th grader, I was unable to be at the meeting, and Bridget, I know, was there along with our other administrators. So I know I did get a briefing from Gary on the meeting, but I think it's probably most appropriate, if you're all right, Bridget, to give us a little bit of an update.
Sure. So we had just a sort of core working group meeting today. It wasn't an extended one with teachers and all of that. It was just the folks who are usually at the working group, minus a couple. Karsten's still in Germany with students and whatnot. The main focus of the meeting was to talk about the rest of the process, really. So where we are is Dora Whittier has provided to the broader working group, including the teachers and some of the folks that have been involved in the process and went on the trips to Massachusetts and that kind of thing. They have provided the 8 options that they've worked up through this process, gone over the details of what each of those options would entail, what the site plan might look like, what timing and phasing and all of that would look like. And then there was an evaluation criteria matrix that we had developed earlier in the process as a group, you know, all the different things that we would use to assess each of the different options and compare them. For the most part, the working group has already submitted that evaluation criteria, and they gave us sort of some preliminary numbers about how those options are looking based on those criteria, just based on the working group. One of the requests out of the meeting today was that potentially Elizabeth and/or Martin and Mike Martin and a couple of people who weren't there today and have sort of, you know, like you guys were at the community visioning session, and Martin, you were involved up until just a couple of weeks ago, really, in some of the working group stuff. We would like a couple more people to fill out that evaluation criteria just to make sure we have the right sample size for that. So that's one thing that's kind of out there. Another thing is just sort of the schedule. So the schedule would really be, they would like, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about the agenda for the meeting 2 weeks from now. The working group would really like it if Dora Whittier could come and present all 8 options to the board and to the public who wants to come to that board meeting. That would be before costs, because we really want to talk about the educational value and, you know, why each of these options makes sense or doesn't make sense on that basis first. So that would be a pretty detailed. You saw the 5 options that we talked about at steering committee. That would take up a chunk of time, but we think it's good to get those 8 options out there and let people start to think about them. On the 26th, and these dates are all still somewhat tentative because we're working on spaces within the district in terms of where we're having these meetings. For the 26th, we were thinking of as a day or an evening, really, from like 7 to 9 p.m., reconvening that community visioning group that came for the full day, including the students that came, including the teachers that came, and sort of presenting the options along with costs to that group, and then have some table discussions and some feedback from those small groups in that meeting. Then on the 27th, the school board already has a working session warned, and master planning and visioning is one of the things on it. We had thought it might be good for Dora Whittier, one representative, to come and talk to us about the meeting following, which we would hope to be on April 11th, which would be a community meeting on master planning and visioning. So it would be a broader meeting, possibly the high school auditorium, where we roll out all the options, all the costs, and talk about the work that's led up to where we are, and talk about what the process would be beyond that. So the 27th, Dora Whittier would come to our working session to kind of talk to us about how to think about structuring that presentation. They've kind of raised their hands to talk about the technical aspects of it and the process thus far, but we're kind of at the stage where they're sort of, you know, done their work. It's kind of our turn as a district to kind of take the ball and run with it. And so the 27th, they would come and kind of talk to us about some of the feedback that was received during the reconvening of the visioning, the community visioning group and all of that, and think about the considerations for April 11th. And then we would need to work on some kind of presentation for the 11th and how we want to structure that night and get feedback from the community that night. So that's just kind of what came out of our working session today. It was a lot longer than that, but it was mostly around scheduling and sort of preliminary look at what the evaluation criteria sort of bear out so far. But yeah.
Thank you, Bridget. Awesome.
Any questions or comments?
Bless you.
All right.
So definitely on the agenda, so some things to just park in your brain, the 26th, which is the Tuesday, and then the Wednesday, the 27th. So there's some asks in here of time, and we can send you back out availability, but before we go too far, as Bridget outlined, we probably will need to know about your availability first. So what we could do is send out just kind of. I've already put it in my calendar. Awesome. But we can make sure that there is some, that you're available on those dates that Bridget mentioned. Okay?
All right. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 13, election results.
So, no, that's all right, Martin. You were just trying to move us along. That's good. So last night, I've sent a lot of things maybe, but the city actually had their spreadsheet, and then ours is the one that you have, which kind of, if you look at that, and then as I alluded to with Martin, we also we've been keeping track of our past results. So on the bottom of that spreadsheet is other tabs which you can click on. I did not, as I said, print those out, but I think it's just important to recognize that obviously our budget passed, but when we look at ours, which is on the back page, we obviously, when you look at the number of voters, the 2,622 votes out of our close to 18,000 voters, and then you look at the activity in each of the districts, I would be interested in our continued conversation around how we can help people weigh in on our work across the districts. And Martin was pointing out all of our districts except one, a 7-4, which is in the Chamberlain area, votes at the Chamberlain school, did not pass. That was one that did not pass. So I don't know what other observations, requests, or ideas that folks have, but I'm certainly open to talk.
Pass the city budget, right? So it's not a blind protest. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the one we often talk about is voter turnout.
Yep.
I don't know if this has been, and that's probably worth a conversation with the city too.
We've shared some voter feedback. Martin actually started that quite a few years ago. This is kind of a build on the same, but I don't know. I think we need to put our heads together, city and school, to say, now we have same-day voter, we have early voting. Obviously, we have our voting locations. So I don't know what it is that people just are not, engaging in providing us their feedback. So I don't know, maybe some of our folks in the audience have some ideas for us tonight too, but I'm certainly happy to bring this back and talk more. And maybe this is a steering committee conversation, but.
I think it's interesting, in the past when we really dug deep into this, we also found that one would think parents are more interested in making sure the budget passes or not, but, and this is fine, that this result we found that it was the same percentage of turnout for parents as for the rest of the community, which I think that's fine, because you want to have as broad a base voting on this as possible, but that was an interesting factor. I don't know that that's changed.
Yeah, I think when I think about the potential ask around master planning and visioning, one of our challenges has always been when it gets down to a final approval, for instance, of a pretty significant bond, which will have been probably by the time we're done 5 years in the making, if not longer. We don't want anyone to be surprised by that, and I worry that if this is the engagement, that we're gonna have our work cut out for us to really inform the community about what that ask might look like.
Yeah, that's been a big discussion within the working group for master planning and visioning, and we talked a lot about that today. And I'm delighted that we've hired Corey Burdick to be our part-time communications director. She's working on getting the master planning and visioning website, the history of it as well, sort of updated and sort of a little easier to navigate and those kinds of things. So the information is there, and there will have to be a big push of different touch points of information along the way, because we can't just spring something like that on people.
The other thing important to mention is that Vince Bolduc and his class through St. Mike's provided an exit poll information in November. And he has that report and that PowerPoint ready to go. So Delanna and I, we have him currently queued up for one of our April meetings to get that feedback. So it may be this may be a good time to maybe either have some city conversation prior to, or maybe that even could be talked about as a joint meeting, if he hasn't already presented to the city. I'm not sure where he's at with that, but anyway.
Good idea. All right, anything else? All right, we'll move on to agenda item 14, policy work.
So right after the board code of conduct and social media, you have your policies. So F1 is educational records. Again, this is the second reading. Security cameras is our first, and F9, pupil privacy rights. So this is again pretty similar education records. I don't think there's a lot of maybe potential questions in there. We've made some changes in F2 or E2, which is the actually I think it's F2, but security cameras. And I don't know, there may be some questions that you have related to some of the red line highlights. Again, these are not up for approval tonight, but certainly happy to talk about any changes. And then we also made some changes to the pupil privacy rights on administrative responsibilities according to recommendations. Security?
Yeah, the security one. In paragraph 5 that is being struck, what is the understanding of how long you might, there's no restriction one way or another on that. And should there be some sort of period where we're not anticipating keeping them just for storage purposes, if nothing else? It's pretty open-ended. Or are you going to just have a practice where it's, what do you anticipate as far as how long they're being stored?
I think we want to be reasonable in our storage time, but we think also by putting a particular period of time puts us more at risk by calling the amount of time.
Yeah.
So we are not going to have things stored indefinitely because it takes up a lot of space and storage space.
Right.
But at the same time,
there could be periods of time where we're having something going on in schools where you may want to keep it longer than, okay. So
I just think that this is a particular area that is important to security and not to be overly informative, so that it allows us to do the things that we need to do. I can't necessarily think of examples in the past, but it may be that there's going to be a long period of a vacation, and you might not notice something because of the activity. And so that may be strategically, deviantly, I guess, figured out, and that would be a problem if somebody was counting the hours based on our policy. So we felt like that was an important component to not have there.
The other question I have is in paragraph 6, which is, I think, the most major change that we have in this policy. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but how do you define incidents? It seems like we're not only changing from that we will not use video recordings to using the video recordings, we're having something that seems broader, or maybe it's not, and there's some ambiguity.
No, that's the very clause that jumped out at me too. It did seem overly broad, but I didn't know if that was offset by the introductory paragraph number 2, which sort of circumscribes, right? But yeah, it did
I
seem.
mean, if that in fact circumscribes it, yeah,
Yeah.
that would be, yeah.
Like a little more definition to incidents.
Yeah, I mean, if it is related to what Brian's saying, number 2, that it's something related to ensuring student, staff, or community safety. But yeah, I think that needs to be a little less ambiguous.
That does feel
Yep.
like a almost complete reversal.
Well, yeah. Well, it is, yeah, it'd be a reversal if we just struck the not, but it seems to go even further that we're looking at more than just misconduct.
Yeah.
That's kind of what,
Yeah, so the import, I mean, from my perspective, and I hear you, we can define a little bit more, but it was specifically related to safety-related concerns. But, things that were happening that
yeah.
could be detrimental to the safety of a student, a staff member. So it's not like any incident. It
Yeah.
was an incident that we believe is going to be concerning for the safety of a staff member, a community member in our building, or a student.
That
And
may be
so
sufficient,
That was really the intent here.
Well, you
but
have it,
The
yeah.
ambiguity of the word incident alone, I totally get, but I'm just trying to make sure that you'd see it connected to related
Right.
to a student or staff community safety related matter. And typically when these are coming through, because we do have, our school resource officers around, and safety officers around, it's generally coming up through that particular as a concern, incident.
That may be sufficient, but, if that's did jump out at me a little bit, but.
Well, and they're related to, as well as the incident, lots of things can be adjacent, but
Right.
sort of assuming somebody wants to misuse it, which, yeah.
Yeah, so we can work on a little tighter definition.
If possible.
Mhm.
I think there are questions out in the audience.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Around number 6 as well, it appears to me that it used to speak directly to issues of misconduct, and that is now omitted. And so does that mean that issues of misconduct could be viewed on the camera? Because just my reading is that this number 6 is completely changed. It's actually
Right.
not related
Yeah.
Right.
to what it was related to.
Right.
And now the whole policy is absent issues of misconduct.
Right.
That's good feedback.
And I just don't know if that's intentional or we just really wanted to make sure that you could use it for incidents of safety.
Does this, in other words, open it up that you are allowed to use it for misconduct? Or do we need to continue to spell that out and just add another paragraph? What's the intent behind it?
mhm. Again, I'm gonna go back to safety-related matters,
So you may want to
and
actually,
so the defining, yeah.
you may want to keep 6 in there and just add a new paragraph,
Mhm.
making it clear it can be used for incidents related to, unless, the only thing is that those may be opposing each other, because it could be misconduct that's related to, so.
I don't think it's necessarily bad.
Yeah.
But I kind of, and this is just my reading, is that I think before number 6 was about protecting the idea of kind of big brother. And I don't think there's anything in here to suggest that it would be used that way, and I also don't think it would be, but that's no longer represented. I don't know if.
Yep. Got it. We'll come back with a.
Yeah.
Any feedback on F1 education records?
Well, like how nitpicky do we want to be? Like in the 3rd paragraph, 4th line, it just says providing parents with access. Do we have to put in and guardians, or does that matter all the way through? Is that too?
No, it's recommended that we do that,
Yeah.
Brian.
Okay.
I guess my question as well is not just this boilerplate, because I know sometimes
Lot of
these
it.
new
All of
policies
it.
about laws are boilerplate. There seem to be mistakes in the boilerplate, though, like, so the parent guardian thing is one, but in number 3, arrangements of protect student privacy, like, some of it is not
Oh, yeah.
quite
Speak.
the boilerplate. Yeah, and I thought, too, maybe a word or two more would make it clearer. Maybe it's clear enough because it refers to.
Are you on
parent-
privacy rights?
Yeah, on privacy rights. I'm sorry. And any applicable procedures for granting requests by a parent for access to such survey within reasonable time after a request is received. My question was, paragraph 1 speaks to parents are allowed to inspect surveys that are going to be distributed to students before they're distributed. 2, I didn't know if we need another word or two, again, to say that the parents can inspect the survey before a student has filled it out. But I don't think that we're saying here that parents can inspect the survey after a student has filled it out. Things like the youth risk behavior survey and all that kind of stuff would be completely a different survey if parents potentially had access to it after it was filled out. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to skip ahead. I thought we had already skipped ahead. I didn't mean to jump off of the other one.
The other one
questions.
Was on number 3, which the flow of that particular sentence, arrangements of protect. Right?
Yeah.
I think it's 2. I think the word of should just be 2 as well, yeah.
So I just wasn't sure if people had caught up with you on that,
Yeah.
because you mentioned that earlier.
Unless there's any other specific feedback, this will be back for
Yep.
second reading, so we'll take another look. All right, we'll move on to legislative update.
So I kind of cheated and provided you the update, the educational legislative update from, you get the same thing, I think the board does, from the School Boards Association. They share this letter together, the VSA, VSBA, and the VPA share this particular letter. So I don't know how you might want to go through that. The only thing I would comment on briefly is around kind of the Act 46 current process. There's certainly delays that are stated here, and I think, pretty apparent that the yield set, which is not yet determined, will be, I think, a more active conversation as we approach legislative end. Because of the current legal actions happening in some of these mergers, how that may change, I think, is pretty likely. And I don't think it will change higher. If anything, it will change lower, which is a concern to us, because if it goes down, then obviously our tax rate will go up. So I just want to, be clear with that. We think right now the equalized pupil number is likely to stay. I mean, that's been pretty solidified and checked now, and others are coming in verified as well. So there may be small change there, but that particular yield one concerns me, and it concerns me particularly because of the unsettled nature of budgets currently not yet approved because of the current legal issues. So the other part of that is, I think it's important to note, is for those that have merged, they're banking on the tax reduction as a result of the merge. So they can be up to 10 cents, 10, 8, 4, accordingly along. Those who came under early adoption are seeing a 10-cent tax reduction, 8, all the way down to the 2. So those are that's essentially what's happening. Is some towns that, as a result of the merger, are able to see a reduction, and their budgets have allowed for some additional opportunities for students, which is what was intended. But I think it's important to note that, in the whole scheme of things, districts like us are seeing that yield change, which has an effect on our tax rate, which is directly connected to it. So that's one that, we're currently watching pretty heavily, which I think obviously has probably the biggest impact. But I don't know, other questions, Martin, obviously not to pick on Martin because he sits there, but sits in the legislature, but I don't know if there's other ones that board members would like to know more about.
Yeah, David? I just learned about a week and a half ago that Patrick Burke was testifying in the legislature about the proposed ban on internet vape sales. That, if someone in the administration or school is giving that sort of testimony or is behind that would be good to keep the board up to date. I think it happened after our last February board meeting.
Yeah, and I thought you were aware.
I was. Oh, I found out when it happened in the news.
No, I thought you were aware of it happening before.
Oh, no.
I apologize for you.
Nope, that's fine.
Because we knew that you were active on this. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
But point well taken. I do generally try to make sure that if there's things like that happening, that the board is aware. Not necessarily can I tell you every time we testify, but if
Right.
it's a big item like that, particularly that you're following or the board's interested in.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right, well, you know, if it was something that the board disagreed with and we have administrators testifying in favor of it, I don't know, we should at least be aware of it.
Yeah, I think, just to be clear, again, this is a little bit about board communications. What I typically try to do is to not let the board be surprised by information that might come out to the public.
Yep.
So in this particular situation, if Patrick was going to be on the news presenting on a big topic, then I would owe a responsibility to just let you know, give you a heads up. And similarly, if news is coming out, if we know about it, we try to give you a heads up as well. So that's note to you, Brian. I don't always hit that perfect, but we try to make sure that you're aware of things that are happening that might be school board related or school related issues.
Yeah. Well, if you want,
we'll take it.
Yep. And also, if you want, you can blame Carrie Lamb, because each time I get one of these through email, I email back to her and say, you excluded the Tobacco 21 legislation, and it is pertinent because it has a strong impact on student outcomes, so you should be including it in your legislative update.
So I don't know, anything else that board would like to talk more about? There are plenty of other items in here, but I don't know where the school construction piece is. Maybe that would be one.
I mean, I've talked to folks on the Ed committee, and I think the reaction of what they're hearing is not panic necessarily, but they're kind of astounded at how this is the backlog and the maintenance and the problem with infrastructure people have not been paying attention to that. Because I think largely because of Act 46, because of the changes to the special education funding formula, that this just, despite your good efforts and my having, this is the second time I brought this bill forth. But all of a sudden I think there's some awareness, and I keep on trying to press the fact that it's not just that backlog of maintenance, it's that our schools are not necessarily the physical spaces that are necessary for the education that we're delivering, and that's an issue as well. So there's a lot of attention in the Ed committee about this. Whether there's any money in the Corrections and Institutions committee that oversees our capital budget is a bigger question, in part because a lot of the funding capacity that is within our bonding capacity at the state level is going towards projects to clean up the lake, and affordable housing is another big thing. So it's still not gotten as much attention as it should. At least the people who hold the purse strings, but I think we're moving this along. I don't anticipate making substantial progress this session, but I think perhaps this biennium there will be a game plan for how we can get to the point where we're really understanding how much of a backlog we have and how we're going to try to deal with it. So
are you considering the new stormwater regs in those projects? No, that's not. I don't know. That is another good point of whether all school districts understand that they have some obligations coming down the pike. I've made David aware over the last couple of years, but that's probably something that the School Board Association should get a hold of and understand that anything with, so by 2023, any property that has 3 or more acres of impervious surface is going to have to do some sort of stormwater projects, and all of our schools are over 3 acres, and there's many other schools in the state, so there's going to be some obligations that are going to be placed on. So that's probably part of it. I should probably
a financial obligation for the taxpayers to do that.
Right, exactly. So,
well, I just want to thank Legislator Martin for helping out with the school construction piece. And while maybe it doesn't get the resources needed, I think, again, there's certainly conversations that I'm hearing and have been asked to respond and help advocate for, which I think is absolutely really imperative. I do, just like the escalating costs, I worry that we're going to get ourselves into a point of no return where things are going to start to happen, which are going to then deprive the opportunities for kids to have the things that they need because we have to deal with infrastructure. And there's many examples of that. I worry a little bit about lead testing isn't one example, critically important, but what about, air quality testing? What about radon testing? What about, PCB testing? I mean, those things, these are all related to infrastructure and upkeep and care that I think we gotta get on top of, because lead testing alone is gonna be, an extremely expensive component, and I don't know to what level they're gonna be able to do that as we move forward.
Yeah, and it's a matter of priorities as well, and I don't think there's been enough effort on making this a priority. Again, moving in the Senate, and this is a priority as well, is affordable housing. They're pushing through, or trying to push through, $50 million bond for additional affordable housing. Is that really where if we only have so much capacity in bonding, is it more important to get our school buildings up to snuff? I mean, it's, these are tough.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that necessarily, but that's, I don't think that question has necessarily been fully asked, and I'm trying to at least get that question in front of individuals to understand that there is this other priority. So, in any event.
Other questions, comments? All right. Move on to agenda item 16, negotiations update.
We have a meeting with the support staff on Monday the 11th, and our next meeting with the teachers is on the 18th, and that's really about all we have.
Okay.
I don't know if you have anything on administrators, but I'm not in the middle of okay.
All right, setting agendas for the March 20th regular meeting and the March 27th work session. So looking, do we have a proposed agenda, David?
Yep, on the 20th,
Yeah, I'm not
Yep.
finding that.
I got it here if you want.
I think I've got it mixed in with some other meetings.
Here you go. We got this one together.
Does everybody have that in front of them? So the regular scheduled meeting for March 20th, any additions or deletions? We've moved the policy work forward. We've added the update on Rick Marcotte Central School land exchange.
I don't have really an addition or deletion. I would just say that 20 minutes is not going to be enough time for master planning and visioning if we're talking about working through all 8 options and letting the board ask questions.
This is on the 20th?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. What do you think might make more sense, Bridget, at this one? What do you think? We need 45 minutes?
Yeah, because I was going to say because if you give them,
Gotcha.
if you give them 5 minutes per option and then a few minutes to ask
45 minutes to an hour, is that more reasonable?
Yeah.
So we'll figure out how to.
I know that makes the meeting go pretty late.
Well, one of the things that we're
already
not
scheduled
sure
till
about
9:45.
is the financial conditions and activities, because we're waiting for the audit return. That was one kind of contingent area, although I was hoping that we would have it by then.
That's a big chunk of time.
But
Yeah.
I don't know that, and again, I would like not to delay that, but we may not be able to have it if we don't have the audit.
I did find that. So. Anything else on the 20th? Shift to the 27th. This is a working session scheduled from 6 to 9. And we've got master planning and visioning on here. The Rick Marcotte Central School land exchange, and then an update on soundproofing at this point.
We didn't put specific times on those items.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to need a good chunk of time on the Rick Marcotte land exchange update.
Mm-hmm.
and soundproofing. Again, this is open to the public, so, but it's really a opportunity for the board to dig in and ask questions and get answers. But
And what was the difference of what we do on the 20th and the 27th for master planning and visioning?
The master plan on the 27th will be the day after we've reconvened the community.
Okay.
And so that would be more, it would be, and again, it would be more board work as opposed to Dora Whittier just making a presentation. It would be Dora Whittier coming to say, this is kind of what we heard at the visioning session yesterday, and here's how you might think about starting to structure the April 11th meeting.
And that's enough time for them to process that?
They're not going to have, tabulated results. The truth is, we're not going to ask that. I think we've kind of come to the conclusion, it's not a useful exercise to have that entire community visioning group try to go through the evaluation matrix. It's many, many, many lines long. There are some subtleties in it that, we tried to make clear, but really, I think the working group understands what they mean. But even I, as a pretty core working group member, struggled to keep 8 options straight in my head and then really fill that matrix out. I think that visioning session on the 26th is going to be more a brief presentation and then some discussions with some key questions that are pulled out of those evaluation criteria for the people to discuss at the table. So they're not going to be like data to tabulate as much as there is, Dora Whittier sort of giving us some impressions. We'll have our own impressions as well from having been there. So it's more of a time to come together and sort of say, where we feel like what the temperature is, basically, of at least the visioning group, and how we might start to think about the structure of April 11th and who would present and what type of information and how to structure that evening.
yeah, I think this is a big part for you, the board members, to be able to digest, listen, receive the feedback. As Bridget said, kind of the temperature of those in attendance that have provided either past and on that night, and then be able to dig in a little bit deeper on the 27th to kind of help determine some direction and ideas that you're having as a result. Again, Bridget's been really involved in it. Martin a little bit more, obviously Elizabeth over the years, but Brian, you're new to it, so it's going to be important, and Alex, you too, around what questions do you have as this is likely to come before you for, what's going to be your recommendation on where do we go from here. So it is all about bringing everybody along, trying to get you a little bit more, zeroed in on the critical information before we walk into some decision making.
Sounds like that is going to be
Yeah, fun,
jam-packed.
right?
Yeah,
That's going to be a busy meeting,
Right.
yes.
jam-packed. All right, future agenda items? Any additions or deletions? And Brian, our goal is to get things off this list.
I have no more suggestions.
Assessment of how we are doing.
Oh, that's
It's been on there a long time. It's, how we're doing
It's
as
our
a
report
board and
here.
whether we're, improving how we run processes and whether we're being responsive and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that would have actually been my hope, to include something like that at a working session, but we've got
I know, we're trying to get some of that
beefy
off, but it's,
topics,
yeah.
huh?
Yeah.
One question that I heard from a community member at town meeting night, and this is sort of tied to master planning and visioning, really more it's a school climate issue, is I was kind of surprised to hear that concern from the community member about people feeling like kids are falling behind at Rick Marcotte because of the construction that's kind of going on around them and the interruptions and that kind of stuff. That was honestly the first day I'd heard of that. I've not had any emails on that. I've not heard that when I've been in the school. I didn't know if that was something that we needed to dig a little deeper in, or whether that was a sort of one-off comment. Or I just that concerned me, and it wasn't something that kind of falls under any of our regular typical agenda items.
I did meet not too long ago with that particular community member, parent, and shared, a lot of concerns related to the Rick Marcotte property, the trees that are coming down, and it's been a conversation for a lot of our students. I've received, 2 envelopes full of letters stating, don't cut any more of our trees, and so I think there's some absolute educational distractions that have happened on that property as far as the right, you know, seeing outcomes go down. I may not have any, I don't have anything formative that I would be able to provide you. I think it's a lot about those kind of just anxieties associated with what's happening to our school, you know? And that's, when I met with a parent, that's kind of what was alluded to. And I think for some individuals, you know, that's been a pretty big distraction for a student. Like, why are they, you know, why are you doing this, you know?
And if it's an anxiety issue, I mean, is there a way that we can mitigate that, or is there something that we can do, you know, to sort of share information, you know, even directly with students, and you know, sort of talk to them about what's going on and how the school's changing and all of that. I just wonder if there's some way we can mitigate some of those concerns.
Again, there's always more that we can do. Counselors are certainly, and teachers are, I think, empathetic and sensitive to responding to those questions, but I think it's a really good conversation around how we can make sure moms, dads, and guardians are in the know, and here's a good platform for that, and our meetings are recorded, and we'd like to hear from them around some of the things that are concerning.
Yeah, the truth is, I mean, I have to say, even as a board member, though, even being in the meetings and being in the middle of master planning and visioning, sometimes I'm surprised by what's happening on Market Street and the timing of it, and on the city side. And a lot of that stuff is concerning because it is out of our control, and it's really surprising to go away for a weekend and then come back and, you know, find dramatic changes. And I think it would go a long way toward people's concerns to just sort of have a little bit more of a sense of what should be expected, because, you know, as we've talked about a lot, we don't have control over it.
And where do we go?
That's not our land. You know, the trees that are being cut down are not on our land. They're not our property, and we don't have control over what other people do on their property. But if we had a better sense of when big changes are coming, you know, when they're going to start constructing Garden Street, when, you know, all those kinds of things, we might be able to just at least give people some warm up before it happens.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. We can certainly get from the city at least proposed projected build-out cycle, or what, I'm just using that word, but, you know, what's proposed to be first, second, third along Market Street. And we maybe could do a simpler version of the map along Market Street, but as you travel it, this is, or a timeline or something, this is kind of what's expected. And ask the city perhaps to do that for us, you know?
I was going to say, perhaps as part of city-school collaboration, there's a dedicated communications person within the city, and maybe we should indicate there's a need to sort of provide a student-facing piece that really talks about, here's how your neighborhood is changing.
It's good.
Okay. All right, we've got a few meeting minutes to consider. February 4th was a negotiation subcommittee meeting.
Oh, one thing that I wanted to note on these negotiation subcommittee, I don't know if I just missed it in previous ones. We have Deirdre Donovan on as one of the SBEA team. It's not Deirdre Donovan who's on the team.
Deirdre Fallon.
It's Deirdre Fallon, and that's on a bunch of these. No. And I think Angie's name is spelled incorrectly too, because I think she's got a J in there, if I'm not mistaken. So those are small things, but I just wanted to make sure that it was clear who was actually in those meetings and not.
Yep. Deirdre Donovan is a teacher.
Yes.
But she is not on
on
the team that has been at the meetings. Yeah.
Okay, so February 4th, February 18th, we had 2 meetings, 9 a.m. and a 5 p.m. February 20th was a regular board meeting.
There was a tiny one on that one on page 4. Again, it might be too small to even be a concern, but when we talked about the negotiations update, I think I gave the same exact negotiations update I did tonight, which is I said when the next meeting with the support staff was and when the next meeting with the teachers was. I think it was you, Elizabeth, who actually mentioned about the outstanding request to the administrators. I don't know if we care to revise it. It was discussed. I'm not that fussed about it, but I just wanted to make sure that it was clear who was speaking and when. So I'm okay either way. It was the only small thing that I had on those minutes.
All right. And the last is a negotiation subcommittee meeting on the 25th. So unless there are any other changes, those are approved by consensus. AP orders 31 and 32. Any questions? All right, seeing none, we'll move to agenda item 21, AP order check to Howard Center in the amount of $151,328.60. And maybe, David, for Brian's sake, we can kind of review what this includes.
Yeah, so these are specific services for student outplay services. And the Howard Center is our agency of service that provides those. So these are amounts going to support those students. And under policy governance, anything that exceeds $50,000 needs to be approved by the board, which we kind of put in the bracketed explanation just to always make sure that the board's aware of why that's coming to you. Yep.
But also, in this particular one, there's $100,000 for our, the third quarter contract for the school social workers.
That's right, yep.
And do we have 3? No, how many do we have?
We have more.
That we contract with Howard Center.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. It's sometimes, again,
There's one in each,
one in each
elementary
school and 2 at the high school. 4, 5, I believe, is probably.
That's right. So, I'll move that we approve the accounts payable order check to Howard Center for Human Services in the amount of $151,328.60.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to adjourn to executive no, we have to go to executive session.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
you
just
need
we'll
to
go into
ask for
exec.
that motion and all
Okay, I
that
will take a
language.
motion to adjourn and go into executive session. Oh, for purposes of discussing labor negotiations with administrators, teachers, and support staff.
So moved.
Premature public knowledge would place the board at substantial disadvantage. Sorry, Alex, I have to say the whole thing.
Got it.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.